This is Florence, home to the dynasty of the Medici, a family that had to claw its way through marriages, spies, and corruption to establish themselves as the rulers of Florence. So here we will cover the Medici's rise to power. Okay, so for the past couple of videos, we have been talking about the Medici, their powerful banking family that somehow established a dynasty that produced 2 popes and 4 queens. But the Medici didn't always have this power. They actually came from the Mugello region, in a small town, kind of like this one. And they had to move to Florence and move up the political ladder to be able to establish themselves as the de facto rulers of Florence.
There were actually many Florentine families that were older, grander than the Medici, but at some point the family's fortune kind of took off, and that was largely because of the great skills, financial skills, technical skills, and also ability at networking that were typical of Giovanni de' Medici, who was the founder of the Medici Bank.
So Giovanni de' Medici is the first really important Medici. He was the person who built the business with which the later Medici would found their power on. Giovanni was a well-to-do merchant, smart and effective. He learned his trade and took the dowry of his newlywed wife, Picarda, to start his business and see how he could make his fortune. So Giovanni de' Medici moved to Rome in the 1300s to found the Medici Bank at Rome, because Rome was the financial center of the Western world. It was home to the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church needed to move its large sums of money from one corner of their empire to another. So Giovanni de' Medici established a good relationship with the Pope, and he managed to secure the Holy Papal Account.
And that really transformed their bank from like a backwater minor operation into a major banking firms. Eventually, under his son, Cosimo, probably the most profitable and the largest banking firm in Europe.
So once the Medici had already established their wealth, they started to look for ways to gain political power. And the best way to do that was through marriage. The Medici were a family of bankers, of merchants. They had no lineage, no nobility, and that is something that is formed by blood. The Medici start to rise up the ranks by forming important political alliances through marriage. Cosimo de' Medici marries Contessina di Bardi. The Bardi were one of the most important and oldest families in Florence at the time. His son, Piero de' Gaudi, married Lucrezia Tornaborni, another important noblewoman from a house in Florence. But it was Lorenzo Il Magnifico, his son, who marries Clarice Orsini, the daughter of a Roman baron and the niece of a cardinal. This was the first time that the Medici looked outside of Florence for a bride. There was no brides in Florence that could match the Medici by then, because the Medici, well, they were expanding their lineage, their connections across first Florence, then Italy, and eventually Europe.
And what happens to these women in the 15th century is, that they are, they're part of mediations between families. Some of these women remain attached to their birth families, and they can become, important as negotiators in various situations.
And so women served as political pawns that extended the power of the Medici. The Medici daughters went on to have even more important and advantageous marriages. Catherine de' Medici went on to marry King Henry II, the King of France, making her the Queen of France. So Florence was supposed to be a republic, but it was actually an oligarchical regime from 1382 to 1434. There was these families of the old guard, the Strozzi, the Caponi, led by the Albizzi, and they actually ruled Florence. So what happened was that There was elections for the councils and the communes, and the people who would sit in those positions would sit in them for 2 to 6 months. And they were elected by chance, by lot. Literally, their names written down on a piece of paper, thrown into a hat, and then picked out. And that's how you got your position. Now, the thing is, these families of the old guard decided what names were allowed to go into the hat to be picked out. So it was these families that were controlling the elections and controlling the outcomes of these elections. And so this was Florence. It was supposed to be a republic, but it was heavily controlled by the same old families, doing favors for one another, keeping the power very close to their chests. And so this very large bureaucratic government would meet here in El Palacio de la Signoria, what is now known as El Palacio Vecchio. And if you were lucky enough to be elected to one of these positions, you weren't allowed to leave this palace for your entire time in office. And this was the den of political corruption that the Medici entered at the turn of the 15th century. And so this is where the Medici come in, because they switch up the equation of patronage links. Most notable families at the time start with their family and then kind of extend outward. But the Medici couldn't rely on their family because their family had no old political lineage or power. So they had to start with their friends and expand their patronage links from down below to literally build up their power. So the Medici acted as patrons, and they handed out capos, favors to the people, such as lowering loan policies, helping individuals get elected to government, even paying for people's daughters' dowries.
This was very important in Florence because if you didn't have a dowry for your daughter, then it was very difficult to marry her off. And of course, this was very expensive. So this was a major investment for Florentine families. And so Cosimo helped many fathers from the lower middle class to dowry their daughters. And this was very much seen as a major help.
And in return for these favors, it meant that the Medici had made friends everywhere, eyes and ears all over the city, eventually all over Italy.
And so anything you needed, any kind of favor you needed, the Medici were the people to go to because they would have someone who knew someone who would know what to do and how to fix the problem anywhere for you. And of course, no one had the same network that they could count on. So that was the decisive factor that transformed the Medici into the go-to people somehow.
So a good example of this is Cosimo the Elder, a very, very important Medici who fully expanded and secured the position of power in Florence. So one of the ways that he did this was by financing the career of his librarian. He really liked his librarian. They thought they were great friends. And so his librarian ended up moving to Rome and studying the humanities, and eventually becoming Pope Nicholas V. Cosimo literally financed the career of one of his friends, and it paid off really, really well because he ended up becoming the Pope, and now the Pope was an important friend of the Medicis. So the Medici became the go-to people based on the favors they could hand out because of their fame and fortune. They granted out the favors that made people very, very thankful, including the Sassetti, which is the family that built the beautiful villa where I am currently. It's where my school is located.
He becomes a worker in the Medici Bank. He eventually founds the branch of the bank that was established in Geneva. He comes back to Florence to manage the Florence branch of the bank. And he and his brother, who weren't orphans, they had parents, but their parents died when they were relatively young. They feel that they have been adopted by the Medici. They are so devoted to the Medici that they invest all of their money in the Medici Bank. So there are families who are really devoted to the Medici for what they feel, and this can also be members of the artisan class. So artists like Donatello or Fra Filippo Lippi, who also get into trouble, but get out of their troubles through Medici intervention, feel very beholden to the Medici for those kinds of privileges.
And so the Medici created a faction, a following, of friends, family, people of the lower classes that all had a vested interest in seeing this family succeed. So that means that everybody in Florence must have loved them, right?
There is kind of a love-hate relationship with them, but it comes from different quarters. So in the beginning, this rise of this family to great prominence disturbs the families that were prominent before. People like the Strozzi, who were probably the wealthiest citizens in Florence before the Medici. Then there are supporters of the Medici, people who feel that they've received benefits from them, or feel that the Medici authority is good for business in Florence.
So there's a clear divide between people who love the Medici and people who hate the Medici. And people who hate the Medici tend to be these old aristocratic families that are envious of the power that the Medici are gathering.
So the Pazzi conspiracy is once again about the Medici being too visibly in charge of things in what is ostensibly a republic. And people who are upset with this decide to try to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano.
In the course of Mass, in the presence of all the citizens, a most sacrilegious event took place. The signal was given. Both men, Bernardo Bandini and Francesco e Pazzi, moved to attack the unsuspecting Medici brothers. It was clever. Where else would you find such a powerful duo, so heavily unarmed? I mean, who would dare try and spill blood on holy soil? Quickly, the men moved to grab Giuliano and stabbed him 19 times. He died instantly. Then they moved to grab Lorenzo, who was nicked in the neck but managed to escape.
So the conspiracy was only half successful, which meant that it was a fiasco, because they managed to kill Giuliano, but they didn't kill Lorenzo. And especially they were hoping to rise the population of Florence to their support, and instead it backfired, and the people of Florence actually rallied to the support of the Medici. So in about one day, all of the conspirators were dead.
So this happens over and over again. The aristocratic families get mad, they kick out the Medici, or they try to kill the Medici come back and they kill or exile the aristocratic families. And this is a sort of back and forth between the people who love the Medici and the people who hate the Medici. But every time, the Medici come back stronger than ever. They pass new laws, new legislation that just kind of secures their power in the government. And so they become the de facto rulers of Florence, the invisible hand behind everything, until eventually, in the 16th century, when they finally established themselves as the Dukes of Florence. Okay, so this is the end of the video. I hope you liked it. It is a tad bit longer than the rest, but it's just because kind of explaining and exploring how the Medici rose to power is fascinating. I mean, it took so much ingenuity, so much interplay. This was a family with little to no political backing. They literally were kind of self-made. It's fascinating. So that's why this video is a little bit longer than the rest. I hope you can forgive me for that. And yeah, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and move on to your next video, which just hopefully happens to be one of mine. Ciao.